Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the national hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Welcome to the Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are going to talk about undocumented immigrants. With me today, I have Vera. Leah uses he, him pronouns and is a supervising attorney for the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence since 2019. For the last 10 years, Leo has worked primarily with immigrants and victims of human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. Leo specializes on immigration law and victims' rights. Leo works from Tampa, Florida, where the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence legal team is based. So Leo, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to all of you, and hi, Priscilla, as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm super excited. And like you mentioned, we also have returning Priscilla Aquino. So Priscilla uses she, her pronouns and is a bilingual victim advocate and crisis counselor at the VSC, who is fluent in Spanish. She obtained her master's in social work from Kean University in New Jersey and has over 20 years of experience working with adolescents, families, and victims of crime. Priscilla is very passionate about helping people heal from their trauma and rediscover their inner strength, as well as educating others. She hopes to be the voice for those who are unable to advocate for themselves. So Priscilla, thank you as well for coming back onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Emily. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited to have this super important conversation today with you both. As many of our listeners already know, the VSC is committed to providing services and counseling to survivors of all kinds of trauma in Central Florida. Ensuring those services are accessible to all kinds of survivors is extremely critical. Survivors can experience many diverse barriers when it comes to accessing care. And today we are going to chat specifically about the barriers undocumented immigrants face, the rights they have after experiencing a victimization. We will also address some common misconceptions about this community and their rights and resources available. So with that, I'd like to start off with some definitions. What exactly is an undocumented immigrant? How would you define an undocumented immigrant?
Well, I guess I can start with, that term undocumented immigrant. A good simple definition is just somebody who was foreign born, somebody that was born in another country, not in the United States, that comes to the United States. They may enter legally, they may enter illegally, meaning maybe they obtained a visa to get here to visit and maybe overstayed. But what makes them undocumented is that past their visit, past their time being here, they do not have legal rights to stay here if they didn't go ahead and file for some type of extension or for some other type of paperwork that would allow them to be documented and allow them to stay here.
I would say also, and I agree with Priscilla, that is part of the misconception of around non-citizen, how they are sometimes called or illegal or undocumented. Now, the Biden administration, they have changed around all the forms within the immigration court system, within the Department of Homeland Security system, to the term from alien to non-citizen. So usually within the immigration court system, Department of Homeland Security, within the federal government, the term alien was being used for years, like historically being used to identify someone who is a citizen of a different country but is in the United States. So I think that was a good step forward to try to humanize more immigration here in the country, and they finally did it. So hopefully we don't have an administration who will revert that, but they already did it. So now they are called in every, federal, within the federal system, non-citizen. So
I'm so glad you brought that up, Leo, because I think that these different terms like alien and illegals can be super harmful. And I appreciate that you brought that up. Priscilla, why are those terms harmful? Leo mentioned kind of using non-citizen is more humane and things like that, or humanizing, I should say. So what are the harms that these other harmful terms can have?
Well, I think when we just even think of the word illegal, we think of it as like somebody did something wrong. There's this stigma that the people that are coming from other countries are all criminals, that they've done something terrible in their country, that they're being released from their jails to come here. It's just this whole idea that they are all bad people. But the reality is they aren't, we have a lot of people that are coming to this country that are educated, that are looking to work. They're looking to, seek that American dream, whatever that means to them, And so when we look at it as illegal, we're almost putting this label on this person coming here as if they did something wrong, as they are bad to society, and the reality is that they're not. And it also opens up this whole idea where it brings up some level of racism as well. When people look at it, as illegal, it brings up a lot of conversation, about racism. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it's oftentimes done where it's taken as a political stance as well. It's used a lot in politics, and it's not used in a positive light as well.
And I will say also that they kept the term undocumented, and the idea around that is for non-citizens who doesn't have a visa, a permanent visa, or some sort of permit or authorization to be or to remain in the U.S. in the territory. So so they kept the term undocumented. So still we will be dealing with the term undocumented, referring to those citizens from different countries who are not either legal permanent resident or they are not a U.S. citizen. Of course, if they are a citizen of a different country, they are not U.S. citizens. Some people have different nationalities as well, or citizenships, but there are a few other authorizations to remain in the country. People who have some sort of visa to remain temporarily in the country, so they are not undocumented, and also people who have DACA. There are a few, a broad range of authorizations, different authorizations. TPS, which is temporary protected status. So the term undocumented will not apply to them as long as they have some sort of authorization to remain in the country.
Absolutely. And Leo, you mentioned DACA. So could you talk just briefly about that? I know that we didn't write it into this, but I realized that's an important term.
DACA, I think, has been one of the most humane projects launched by the federal government in the last few years within the immigration laws. It was authorized by the Obama administration and applies to non-citizens who were brought to the country when they were children, right? So sadly, after the previous administration took place, they tried to repeal DACA and have been in litigation, and basically now it's just in a place where they are not allowing like more applications, like new applications, but hundreds of like thousands of young people apply for that. You know, I have talked to people who came to the US when they were 3 months old, and they don't know any other culture. They don't know any other language other than English. And they have done all their life here. There are attorneys, people who have devoted their life to even to public service, to different professions like nurses. And they hold the DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And every 3 years, they need to renew the employment authorization. I need to double check if now they have to do it every year, because the previous administration, they have been trying to eliminate this status for young people. And there are hundreds of people who already hold that document, so they can apply for employment authorization. They have their social, they can have a work, they can legally work in the US. There are a bunch of different benefits and things they cannot do, even though they have employment authorization, but at least they can legally work, and many of them, they can finish their studies. So they cannot apply for federal, for example, they cannot apply for federal funding for student loans. So if they are in the university or something, they need to apply for private funding. So.
Thank you so much, Leo. I really appreciate that. Yeah. I think that's wonderful that this act exists. And also what you both were kind of talking about were kind of there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to this population, I feel like. And so what are some other misconceptions that you wanted to bring up about undocumented immigrants that you wanted to kind of address?
Well, I think that, when we talk about some misconceptions, obviously a big one that, all undocumented people are criminals, or that they're illiterate or they're uneducated and they're coming here to feed off of our system, our resources that we, can offer. But the reality is that you do have people that are just trying to seek a better life for themselves and for their families. There are people that are educated. There are people that know how to read and write. People that had really good standing jobs in their countries, and for whatever circumstances, they had to come and migrate here. A lot of, and we're not just talking about the Hispanic population, we're talking about the worldwide population, because everywhere across the world, there's like some type of civil unrest maybe going on in their countries and whatnot, and they're coming for safety. They're coming as a way to escape of what they're going, and they feel like they will make that effort, that sacrifice to remove themselves from a dangerous situation and come here without realizing what challenges they may face here. But, they're willing to take that sacrifice. So, we're talking, there's this whole idea of, even where people, a lot of times we have parents that the families are broken up. Parents are, sometimes they come by themselves and they leave their children behind, or vice versa. They'll send their children first, with other people, maybe with strangers that they've paid off to, bring them here or whatnot, or send them with family. And parents stay behind, and then people are like, how dare you? Why would you do that? There's a lot of reasoning behind that, why they make that choice, why they make that decision, why they make the sacrifice of separating the family. And so, those are just some misconceptions and some ideas that a lot of people feel like, undocumented people, they come here, to create more chaos or whatnot, but there's always a story behind a reason why they are here. And a lot of times it's heartbreaking when you hear some of those stories. I was working with, a victim just recently where, she was in her country. She had to, she came here because her husband, pretty much sliced her with a machete. She was in such a terrible, violent, domestic violence situation that she had to run away because he was going to kill her, and she brought some of her children with her. She had to leave one son behind, so there's a story and there's a reason why they're here. And the reality is that these are people that are very strong, hardworking people that will work at any type of job. They will do the jobs that some other people will refuse to do. They are striving to provide for their families. They are striving to provide safety. They're trying to provide, what they see as this American dream for their family, but they are unable to achieve or receive in their own countries. So I think the biggest misconception is that, they come across as these weak individuals needing to, come, here to better themselves. But you'd be surprised on how that is not the case. When you hear some of these stories and where these people come from, it's amazing that they even survived just to travel alone here, to get here.
So, I would also add that there are so many misconceptions. And sometimes I think, I won't say lack of information, because there is plenty of information available, although many of the information that is available nowadays is not accurate. And I think that comes into play with the political views of whoever put that information out there. But some of the misconception is like immigrants endanger public health. There is no evidence about that. There is no evidence about that, and there is no evidence, because this have never happened, that immigrant has been the source of any modern disease in the U.S. Also, the other misconception is that immigrant vote, and many people are afraid that always you see in the news there are 11 million people living in the U.S. Who are citizens of a different country, and they don't have. They are undocumented, they don't have a legal status, and they are voting. That is not correct as well. There is no evidence whatsoever in absolutely any state in the US stating or demonstrating that undocumented non-citizen, they go to vote, And in fact, the violation for illegal voting is really, really low in the US. There are a strong safeguards in place to ensure that only U.S. citizens they vote. The other big deal, the other big deal is that many people says, well, they are taking our jobs. So they are taking our jobs, and now I am a U.S. citizen and I cannot find a job because immigrants are taking this specific job that I am entitled to. Well, that is not true either. I think to experience the reality, the cruel reality about this misconception, people can go to a place here in Florida called Immokalee. Immokalee is a farm worker town in South Central Florida, close to Naples. And if you go there, you will see who is taking the jobs, like farm working or farm workers. These are the people who are now feeding the product for Publix and many other grocery stores here in the state. And yeah, the majority of them, they are undocumented. You know why? Nobody else wants to do that job. Nobody else wants to do that job. Nobody else wants to be paid 25 cents, sometimes per hour. And this is not something that I read in internet or I Google. I experienced this myself by talking to people at 3 o'clock in the morning who were waiting in a parking lot to go with crew leaders to the field to pick up strawberry, tomatoes, and I don't know what else, Sometimes 25 cents per basket. And depending on the field, sometimes filling a basket is not possible in 1 hour. So that is a slavery. And that we have that here, And also about jobs, just immigrants, the immigrant population in 2019, they pay 492 billions in taxes. I think that is there are a bunch of important statistics that we can read to understand that these misconceptions are part of, news that people read, bias, racism, people who spread this misconception to get on board others who doesn't have, don't want to get informed with accurate information. They are also, and you see this in profiling, how many sometimes agents, law enforcement, they profile people by their accent, by the color of their skin, how they look, right? And they immediately say, well, if they don't speak English fluent, or if they have this specific accent, then they are undocumented. And many people call eyes on them. And many times that had happened on people who are U.S. citizens, even because they either because they were born here in the U.S. or because they naturalized U.S. citizen. And 77% or over 77% now of us citizens born in a different country, they have a lawful status in the U.S. Also, they are say, well, immigrants, they are terrorists, or they are violent. Well, the statistic shows that immigrants are less likely to commit a crime and to be in jail than U.S. citizens. And also, there is no evidence whatsoever to show that we have seen people entering through the border who are terrorists. The statistic, the evidence, the facts shows that whenever we have experienced a terrorist attack here in the U.S. or, something that happened, that person entered the country legally, whoever committed the crime. So those are some of the, some misconceptions that I can mention. And the other big deal that is also part of the political debate is that they are immigrant, they are living from public benefit from the government. And that is not true. That is not true either. First, undocumented immigrants, they are not eligible for absolutely anything. No social security, no insurance, nothing. Even to pay out of their pocket for private insurance is really challenging, because private insurance, they will require a social security number. And this is very sad, because during the last 10 years, I have spoke with over probably 800 people, like one-on-one, sitting with them, like talking as a human being for over 1 hour at least. And sometimes it's so sad to experience how they struggle to find healthcare, how they struggle to save money, how they struggle to make like just simple transactions, because they don't have authorization to work, they don't have a social security, they are not eligible for anything, even when they are living in extreme poverty. Sometimes they have, family members who are in need, family members who are sometimes citizens, but the reality is that they are not eligible for public benefits at all. No food stamp, no social security income, nothing.
I agree. I'm so happy, Leo, that you bring that up, because as a social worker and as somebody that works directly with clients, that is the number one struggle, is trying to work with someone who is undocumented, who comes to you because they were a victim of a crime, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they're struggling with, finding housing, somewhere to live. Maybe they're hungry. They can't, they don't have access, to food pantries or whatnot. They cannot apply for any type of federal program. They can't apply for food stamps. They can't apply for TANF. They can't apply for Section 8. They can't apply for Medicaid, any type. They can't, because they do not have any papers. They don't have a social security number. And it's so challenging. Like you have mentioned, Emilie, I'm originally from New Jersey, and I did work with a lot of victims of crime up there. And I worked specifically with one client who was a victim of a robbery. He was homeless. He was assaulted and robbed underneath a bridge where he was sleeping at, undocumented. And because of the pandemic, had lost the job that he was working. So he, didn't have a way to pay for things. So he was living under a bridge. I started working with him, and every door that I knocked on to try to get him some type of service, some type of help, he did not qualify. He did not qualify for shelters. He did not qualify for any type of medical insurance. The only thing I was able to get for him was some hospital assistance, at where I was working at the time. So he was able to at least get that would cover like emergency room visits. That was it, as we tried, over and over. And I would call it 211 is a number that you can contact for any type of community resources, and they would link you up. They will refer you to any kind of help that you might need. And that's something that's here in Florida. It's also the same thing in New Jersey. And I remember calling 211, and everything that I brought up, they're like, he doesn't qualify. He doesn't qualify. So it was very challenging to assist somebody like that. And, when they're asking you, how can you help me? What can you do for me? And it's like, unfortunately, there's not much that I can do. And there aren't a lot of resources that are willing to, to provide, or, community agencies that may say, yeah, sure, we can help somebody like this. So it's challenging to help somebody like that, but that is a very big misconception. They do not qualify. And it is one of the biggest challenges, working with somebody directly one-to-one. Like, how do you tell somebody, I'm sorry you're asking for help, but I can't help you because you don't qualify? And then they stay stuck in the same situation. They're not able to move forward. And that's frustrating as a worker, as somebody trying to, help and make a difference. And it's just that you feel stuck yourself. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really heartbreaking. And I really appreciate you both breaking down a lot of these misconceptions. I think that there's probably even more, countless ones that we haven't been able to get to. And for the sake of this conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about, what you brought up, Priscilla, which was the fact that a lot of these individuals may find themselves experiencing victimization. And so to kind of shift the conversation a little bit here, I think it might be helpful to define what a victim is. So what is the legal definition of victim?
There are a few, right? Sometimes if you go to federal documents, they define victim or a person who has suffered physical, sexual, financial, or emotional harms as a result of the commission of a crime. Here in Florida, in 2018, it was passed what is called Marsy's Law, which is basically an addition to the Florida Constitution on Article 1st or Article 1, Section 16. And it defines victim, and it has like a broad definition of victim, which I think is good. It was something needed actually, and defines victim as a person who suffered, and I will read because it's really broad, as a person who suffered direct or threatened physical, psychological, or financial harm as a result of the commission or attempt commission of a crime or delinquent act, or against whom the crime or delinquent act is committed. The term victim under Marsy's Law here in Florida includes the victim lawful representative, the parent or guardian of a minor, or the next of kin of a homicide victim. The term victim doesn't include the accused, and the terms crime and criminal include delinquent acts and conduct. So to be a victim, the person doesn't have to be convicted, It doesn't require that you file a report. It doesn't say that, which is important. It doesn't require a prosecution or investigation of the case. And I think that is the right definition, because many times, or the majority of the times, we see crimes who are not prosecuted, they are not investigated at all. And then we have victims. And also it's important that they include and they recognize that not only physical harm, which is historically the type of act that used to qualify a victim. They are also recognizing psychological harm and emotional harm, and financial harm as well. I think that is important.
I think that's such a great definition. I'm glad that it is broad, like you were mentioning. And I think that, do you find that sometimes undocumented immigrants or either people in general may not even know that they're a victim, and therefore they don't even know that they have rights because of their victimization?
I mean, I would say the majority of the time, they don't see themselves as a victim, They don't see themselves as a victim, which is sad, because you hear their story. For me, one of the this experience that I have actually have marked my life as a lawyer, and is when I talk to someone and the person was trafficked and was also smuggled to the US by people, and human trafficking involved, smuggling involved. It was a child, and talking to the person who was trafficked, who was smuggled to the US, they didn't see that they are actually a victim of human trafficking, And the smugglers, they were expecting sexual relationship by force, which is not a relationship, right, with the victim. And it was kind of hard. And also the smugglers, they were getting rid of people who were getting behind because they didn't have water, they didn't have food, and they were giving them a pill, and that pill was killing people along the way. So those people who were not able of, walking at a fast pace, they were giving this pill, and they were just dying on the desert. So this person survived, and the person was telling me that, And guess what? She didn't see herself as a victim. So, yeah, and usually this happens. Usually even happen with victims of domestic violence. They don't see, and sometimes you talk to people and they tell you talk to victims who has been experiencing psychological harm for 10 years at the hand of their partners, and they don't see that as a violent act, but they can describe to you all the struggles that they have experienced in their life as a result of the psychological violence at the hand of their spouse or partner or another relative, usually a spouse or partner. They don't see themselves, and they sometimes tell you, I am not a victim because he or she never touched me. She never touched me. So she never put a hand, or he never put a hand on me. Never. But then this happened,
I think it's safe to say also that when we think about if they consider themselves a victim or not, and this is for anybody across the board, right? Undocumented people, whoever, right? I feel like it's twofold. One, it may go back to maybe that was the way of life for them, their upbringing. It's what they saw. It's what they were exposed to. If they were exposed to that type of violence at home between mom and dad and whatnot, then they might feel, well, that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be. We see that a lot with sexual assault as well, childhood sexual abuse. Well, I thought I thought that's what it was supposed to be, so it was okay in my eyes. So we have to, take into account what their upbringing was, what they were exposed to culturally, what if that was acceptable or not. I remember one time working with a teen parent who, she moved in with her child's father at the age of 11, and the child's father was 21 years old. And of course, immediately, DCF was involved and whatnot, because you got an 11-year-old now living, with a 21-year-old. When they contacted her mom's response was, well, thank God it's one less person that I have to worry about and take care of in the household. he can take care of her and she's going to be okay. Now I can focus on my other children in the house, So if that's something that's acceptable in the family, then that young girl, it was okay that she got pregnant at a very young age and that she was living with this man and being, this quote unquote dutiful wife type person, but at 11, so we have to think about that. And also, I believe also there's a part of lack of education. I don't think that everybody is fully aware of, for an example, like you have mentioned, Leo, domestic violence. It's not just physical assault. You have so many different components and people are not aware of that. They're not aware that it's not just a physical aspect. It is also the emotional, financial. It's also the psychological, abuse. And so I think that there is some level of, just lack of education. People are just not aware. They just don't know. They didn't realize, oh, really? That's abuse? I didn't know that was actually happening. I didn't know that that's what you called it. I thought that was just the way it was, and that's okay. So I think those are just some other aspects to think about when we try to have this conversation of why victims don't see themselves as victims.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we're not saying that, for those who prefer a different term like survivor and things like that, that's a separate conversation. This is more of just understanding that what happened to them was wrong and illegal and a crime. So going off of that, we were talking a little bit about the different barriers. Priscilla, you were talking about one of your clients that you were working with up in New Jersey, and you ran into so many different barriers because of their immigration status. So I wanted to kind of lean in a little bit about that. What are some of the barriers undocumented immigrants face when it comes to accessing services, reporting, etc., following victimization?
Yeah, so there's many barriers, but I think some of the bigger ones, obviously language is a very big issue. A lot of agencies do not have translators or interpreters. They don't have, I know nowadays there's a very big push of hiring bilingual, staff, but, it's not just Spanish. We have to think about Portuguese. We have to think about who's living in your community. When I was working in New Jersey, and I used to work in Elizabeth, and that community was very big, Portuguese community, Hispanic community, but there was a very big Haitian community. So Haitian was also, Creole was something that we also had to try to provide. So when you are unable to provide your own literature, your own services, and I guess in a multilingual kind of factor, it can be challenging. It can be a barrier. But I also will say, though, that there is a push and there are, people are making a big effort into trying to hire more bilingual staff. Like just even myself being at the Victim Service Center, there's a big push in hiring more bilingual, staff. So, which is why I was brought on. So, I think that that's amazing. And also there's just being able to have a language line, right? Being able to have that service. Yes, that can be expensive. However, though, larger agencies and sometimes more federal agencies, like maybe within the courthouse or something like that, they will offer language line services, where they can call and at least be able to have an interpreter on the line, so that's a big barrier and that's very important. Another big one, not having, social security number to be able to qualify to apply for resources and whatnot. I think that a lot of times, clients will have in their head, like if they're undocumented, their biggest fear is, if I report this or if I try to get help, I'm going to be deported. They're going to send me back. So that will immediately stop them, in terms of, of going ahead and reporting something or accessing services. I hear that all the time. Or maybe it's somebody that already has an immigration case in the works. And they're like, I don't want to disrupt that. I don't want to bring anything negative to my case. And it's kind of like, okay, well, do you understand your rights still? Like, what does that look like? And then it generates another conversation. Like I was just talking to a client this week, a brand new person who, she is in a domestic violence situation right now, and she does have an active immigration case. And she has not reported anything because she's afraid that it's going to jeopardize her case. And unfortunately, her husband is, manipulating her and controlling her and telling her, these misconceptions and false ideas. So then puts fear in her, and then she's just like, I'm not reporting it. So there's a lot of layers with that, but I think that there's this fear of deportation. There's also this fear of separating the family. I know a lot of times, when there's children involved, the parents may also be fearful of like, well, if I report this, what's going to happen to my children? I don't want to separate my children. I don't want anything to happen. Or if I get deported, what's going to happen to them? So there's just that idea that they run with in their head of, I need to preserve the family unit, right? So sometimes that might mean I'm going to just take on with what's happening, and I'm not going to report anything, and I'm just going to stay, where I'm at. And then I also think a really big one is, lack of education, of knowing resources, of knowing what's out there. I hear it all. I didn't know this. I didn't know I had this option. When I'm working with a lot of the sexual assault, victims, they are just like, well, I didn't know that I had a right to, obtain a forensic collection kit. I didn't know that I had a right, to an advocate or, or to speak to anybody or to get counseling. They weren't aware. So I feel that, there is some level, where there's just they're just unaware. I think that's just the best way to put it, that they're unaware of what's available to them.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing up the additional fears. A lot of times when we work with survivors, there is a lot of fear to reporting, the process, the fear of being blamed, and then, fear of retaliation, especially if it's in a domestic violence situation and things like that. So that fear of deportation, I can't even imagine, especially fear of being separated from the family as well. Just all those different barriers, I think, can be just really, really strong, essentially. And I'm really glad that we're having this conversation so we can talk about those services that are available to survivors, like you were mentioning, Priscilla. Leo, I know that one of those amazing things that can actually protect some survivors is actually the U visa. So can you talk a little bit about that visa and how it can help survivors?
So, yeah, I think that U visa is one of those benefits available to survivors. And I would say just a few, because there are not too many. And survivors who are undocumented non-citizen. So they have to go through a lengthy process. And when I say really, it's a long process. Now it's taking over 7 years. And then they have to overcome all sort of barriers and issues during all that time. One is the language that Priscilla was mentioning, also those bias and discriminations from people who are in charge of protecting them. I would say this: anybody in the U.S. territory, they have the protection of the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't matter whether or not they have a paper saying you have a visa or a U.S. birth certificate or whatever. They are all equal under the law according to the U.S. Constitution. There are a few things that are not attached to someone who is a non-citizen, right? Undocumented non-citizen, like right to vote and a few other things. But as to protecting their life, for example, there is an equal protection clause that applies to them. And law enforcement, they must act on anybody's behalf who has been a victim of a crime. So undocumented non-citizens who has been a victim of different crime or a crime, they can apply for this, what is called U visa, which can give them a visa, a temporary visa, and then after 3 years, they can apply for the legal permanent residence status. And then 3 years, they apply for the green card, which is commonly known as green card. And then after 5 years with the green card, they can apply for the U.S. citizenship. Again, they have to be eligible all the way along. I mean, from the very beginning, right? So what happened with U visa applicants? So first, they have to submit all the evidence and then they have to wait 7 years to get half the case adjudicated. Right now, there are over 165,000 cases pending, and then with family members, the number is 276,000, over 276,000 pending cases in the US, like as we speak. And that is why it's taking that long, right? We have a statistic from 2009 when only about 21,000 cases were pending at the time. Now you can imagine how these numbers have been increased with the pass of the years. And one of the reasons is that this is not people filing an application because they are filing an application with the Department of Homeland Security. These are victims who have been a victim of a crime in the US, and then they apply for this specific protection, which is not more than a benefit. This is a protection for them, right? So the idea from the federal government is to let people know that if they are a victim of a crime, they can go to the authorities so that crime can be prosecuted, investigated, and the perpetrator brought to justice, right? So that is part of the whole idea, and also protecting someone who was a victim of a crime. So what happened here, that a U visa victim applicant have to get a document called U visa certification. So it's not someone who qualifies under this definition that I just read a few minutes ago, right? No. That is not the case. The person not only because qualify under this definition, right? But also the person has to submit a bunch of different documents. Among them, there is a document called U visa certification that has to be issued, certified by either law enforcement, the state attorney office, a judge. I have never seen a judge doing this in 10 years. And the state attorney office just a few cases. The majority of the time is law enforcement. What happened? That if a victim happens to be in one of those jurisdictions where the sheriff have the mentality of saying, no, we are not certifying absolutely anybody for your visa because we don't like immigrants, that's it. This person cannot do anything, you know? So, and I haven't seen like a challenge yet with those positions because law enforcement has their own set of rules and in court, and I haven't seen a challenge in court to those positions where law enforcement refuses to certify, because sometimes the crime doesn't move on. And one of the reasons the crime doesn't move on is because bias and discrimination sometimes within the person handling the investigation of the case and the prosecution of the case, you know, or because whatever other reason, you know. I had a case where the person was clearly a victim of domestic violence, battery, arson. They never concluded investigation. And then they refused to sign the U visa certification because the investigation was not concluded. And when you read the report, and I remember clearly the report, they are listing things or steps they have to take, right, in order to continue the investigation. They never did it. And you can see how they were referring to the people, to the victim not being fluent in English. You know, that is kind of sad. And then I was talking to the person because we requested a certification on behalf of the victim. And one of the answers was, no, I mean, this jurisdiction doesn't favor issuing U visa certification. So you can imagine how challenging it is for a victim even to have access to this law and to the protection of this law that was enacted in 2000 by the Congress. It's not a new law, you know, has been in place since 2000. And one of the reasons is that many crimes have been happening across the states, and they were not reported because victims, they were afraid of reporting the crime. and with reasons. They were afraid of reporting the crime because they were afraid of being detained at the time of reporting the crime. So also the victim has to collaborate with the prosecution and investigation of the crime. So it's not someone who goes to a police station and say, yeah, I was a victim of a crime, this is what happened, and then disappear. No, to be eligible, they must continue collaborating with law enforcement, the state attorney office, and the authorities in the prosecution investigation of the case. It doesn't have to have a conviction. It doesn't have to have, an investigation concluded, but at least the person has to collaborate with the police, and also the person has to suffer some sort of harm. Sometimes someone is a victim, and then we have seen authorities say, well, yeah, I was a victim, but the person didn't suffer anything, right? So we have seen a lot of different things about position from, people within law enforcement and other entities through the justice system who are in charge of making sure the law is complied with, right? And they are also in charge with protecting this non-citizen who has been victim of different crimes, but they don't do it because bias, discrimination, because this is what we still have, within our justice system. So, the other thing that happened is that we have seen victims who doesn't recognize they have been victim of a crime, right? And they don't report the crime. Also, we still have victims, they don't report the crime because they are afraid of being detained, or they are afraid of the process, they are afraid of the police, right? They are afraid of going to the courthouse. They are afraid of going to this place and not having the ability of communicating in the same language. And they don't report the crime. Also, we have seen people who have been victim for years, I have had clients who have been victim for years, for over 20 years of human trafficking, and they don't report, especially people who have been victim of labor trafficking. I always tell my colleagues, one of the most common crimes that take place within the immigrant community, undocumented non-citizen immigrant community, is victim of labor trafficking. People who has been labor trafficked in farms or in any other construction settings, right? And they are working there because threats from employer. Sometimes we have seen employer who just provide some board and room, and they pay nothing, and on top of that, the person has to pay them back whatever. If they live there for 1 month, they need to pay the rent month to month, even though they are not getting paid anything else. So they never see the money, and what I've seen is that the majority of the people I have seen during the last 10 years, they seek protections in the US. And the second reason is, the first reason is protection, seeking protections from gangs, protection from persecution for political opinion, persecution for religious belief, or for social issues also in their home countries, and they come here and they seek those protection. And the other is like fleeing poverty in their country. Those are some of the two main reasons I have seen among the people I have talked to. But I have talked to people who have been victim of different crimes, and they never filed a report. And the other thing is that sometimes they go to law enforcement and to file a police report for, I don't know, extortion or false imprisonment, or for perjury, and they don't sometimes they don't do anything, And then I talk to my clients and they say, well, I reported the incident because I have been harmed by this conduct from this person, who can be anybody, right? And they don't do anything. And you can see the difference when in many jurisdictions you see the difference when and how law enforcement acts when a victim is white, black, or undocumented non-citizen. You know, you can easily distinguish what is the reaction of the specific law enforcement office, right, as to how they will act if the reporting person is white, undocumented citizen, black, Latin, or whatever. You know, sadly, there are differences as to how they move forward with investigation of the case. And there are a bunch of different, so there are over 16 different crimes by which a person can qualify for a visa. Usually like battery, sexual assault, those are the most common. But I have never seen the last 10 years like prosecuting a case for like criminal stalking when my clients have filed a police report for stalking, which is a crime, right? And unless something results into death, it's really challenging for them to have a prosecution, you know, on to see justice on those specific crimes, witness tampering, blackmail. I have seen people who has been blackmailed for years and years and years and nothing happened. So I think there is a lot within the U-Visa realm that can be has to be improved. But before that, I think that there has to be a change in the mentality of many people who have the power and the ability of making a difference, you know?
Absolutely. I appreciate you breaking all that down. I think that there was a lot in that where, first off, I didn't know how many different victimizations the U-Visa can, people can be able to apply for because of it. And also you were highlighting just additional barriers that they are facing just to get access to this visa that is really there to help them. So I appreciate you kind of highlighting that. And in addition to that, you brought up how they can be at risk for other crimes. So on the one hand, we're seeing how there are barriers that undocumented non-US citizens face when looking for services. And on the other hand, we're seeing that because of their status, because of a lot of different isms that you were talking about, racism and things like that, otherism and all that, they're more at risk for crimes in addition to that. So I wanted to ask you, Priscilla, given your work with survivors and knowing that sexual violence is about power and control, why are undocumented immigrants more at risk for things like sexual violence?
That's a good question. And it definitely goes in line with what Leo was saying. I think a lot of the undocumented, people that come here, depending on how they get here, they're at the mercy of maybe who brought them here, or maybe, they're very vulnerable. It's a vulnerable community of people. Especially if it's somebody that arrives here and they don't have any family, any friends, they don't know the area, they don't know. So it almost makes them an easy target. And which then brings along the whole trafficking, that human trafficking, labor trafficking, and sex trafficking. A lot of times these, many survivors, they will end up in a situation where it's almost not even negotiating, because there is no negotiating in trafficking. It's just like, oh, well, you're going to do this for me, and yep, we'll give you a place to sleep, and that place might be a little box of, on the floor, or we might give you one meal a day, depending on what whatever the setup is, or whatever the type of trafficking that it is. But these perpetrators, they will hold so much, and it has maybe. When they came here, maybe they had, their birth certificate, maybe they had their passports from their country. And then all of a sudden they take those documents from them and they're like, okay, we're going to hold this, but you have to do this for me. Right. So it's almost being like at the mercy of these people here. Like, if I want to survive, I'm going to have to do whatever it is that they're asking me to do. And so there's where it becomes where they're just so vulnerable, and they find themselves, being sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, and just in other types of victimization. So there's a lot that goes into it. In addition to, like, what if they come here, whoever they left behind, maybe it's a mom that left behind some children, and their perpetrators are aware of this, and they might say to them, you don't do this for me, I'm going to call, and we're going to, hurt your family. We're going to hurt your children. I hear that a lot from survivors, where they're so scared of doing something here, against their perpetrator, because they have access to their children back home. I'm working with a victim now, a survivor now, who she has a child back in her country, and the perpetrator has threatened her multiple times. If you file a report, if you do this, I'm going to go and call, and they're going to kill your son. So she feels like pressed as well. What can I do? I have no options, because I need to preserve my son's life. I need to make sure that my son is okay. So in a sense, she sacrifices herself for, doing whatever it is that she needs to do in order to take care of her son. So it really depends on the circumstances that they might be facing at the time, which makes them, very vulnerable, and increases their chances for being victimized.
Yeah, it's so heart-wrenching, to be honest. And I think that at the end of the day, we talk about it a lot, how these crimes are really about power and control. And so when individuals are more vulnerable, like Priscilla and Leo, you were mentioning all the different barriers and things like that, I can see why it can sadly put them more at risk, which is why it's so important that we're having this conversation. I wanted to also ask you specifically, Leo, of course, remaining confidential, of course, could you perhaps share a success story when working with a victim who was an undocumented immigrant?
So I have worked a lot with children, over probably 150 children during the last 10 years. When I say 10 years, it's not as a lawyer 10 years. I got my license in 2016, but then I have been always working within the public interest law area with as administrative assistant first, then BIA, but all the time, working with immigrants or public interest law offices. So we have seen we saw someone who was trafficked, and this is a case that we got also the authorization to share some of the facts for this case. So the person, a person under the age of 18, this person from a country in South America had to flee their country because violence. The person was persecuted due to her social status by people who the country or the government didn't want to investigate or control. They were also unable to control. There are a few gangs organizations, in some of the South American countries, especially this triangle of country known as Guatemala, El Salvador. So I think in Honduras. So this person also, on top of that, has been experiencing domestic violence all her life by her own father, sexually assaulted by their own father, who later wanted to give it away to a man who was like 36 years older, 36 or 46 years older, for a cow. So the father was trying to change his own daughter, who at the time was about 8-9 years old, for a cow. So that case was really challenging because you're dealing with all these issues, and in the middle of everything there is a child, an innocent child, and this person, also the language barrier. So this person has to flee the house. She came to the US, and she was also victim of sexual assault and human trafficking all the way from South America to the US. So she applied for U visa and she got the U visa. I think she got the U visa because on top of everything, she was a victim here in the US of another crime. So you have seen. So we talked to this person who was a victim of horrible incidents in their own country, right? They came here seeking protection, and here they were also victim of a crime. And finally, at least she got the U visa and she got the green card as well. This is a case that took years and years and years, but we were able to help her. So those are one of the cases. And what happened is that with undocumented non-citizen is that when we see a victim and we talk to them, there are so many instances where they have been victim of so many different crimes, not even 5 crimes, sometimes 7, 8, and they don't report. We also talked to someone who was victim of battery in a different state, flew from this state to here to Florida, and the person never reported the crime because the person was afraid of reporting the crime, and also horrible incidents this person experienced, but she never reported the crime. So she couldn't, at least for the U visa purpose, she couldn't apply for that. So we have seen a lot. The majority of the time we see people who, they don't report. And also we have had the opportunity of working in cases where law enforcement refuses to sign the U visa certification. And every time we take a case, it's because the case has the evidence to prove that the person is eligible for the U visa. Then we need the U visa certification. And we have seen law enforcement agencies refusing to provide the U visa certification because political reasons. You have seen the head of the organization giving a news conference where they say, no, we are not signing U visa certification. We are not doing that. We don't believe on that system. So it's really sad. And it's really disgusting also listening to a person who has been charged with protecting others, making those statements even in public and nothing happened.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. I'm really glad that there was stuff that could be done for her. Really, really heart-wrenching. And I appreciate you again talking about the many different barriers. And I'm just so grateful that you exist and all of the amazing work that you do. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about community resources. So I know that the VSC and Priscilla, maybe you could talk a little bit more about it, that we're able to provide our free services to survivors regardless of immigration status because we don't take insurance. We don't need that information. But how can community resources like the VSC and beyond help undocumented immigrants who face victimization?
I think that, when we think about all community resources and then, bringing it right down to us, to Victim Service Center, I always like to say helping all survivors. It's all about, helping them to understand their victimization, understanding the support system that can be developed, as a result, that they're not alone. It's about teaching them empowerment, teaching them how to gain back control, power, things that were stripped from them, providing them education, and providing them a platform, a place to kind of just explore their thoughts and feelings and to just understand, because that's all part of their process of their process, their journey to heal from their trauma, to get control back of their life and to move forward and to establish themselves, right? And to create, a better future for them, just a better life for themselves. So I think that, I think we can all do that, Do I think that all agencies work like that? I think it might little head, that might be the perfect, solution, perfect idea. But I want to hope and believe that we are on some level on the same track, and I feel that at least with us here at the Victim Service Center, that's what we strive for. We're here to support, our survivors, and letting them definitely know that at least when I speak with my survivors, I let them know right from the front, you are in control of this whole process. I'm going at your pace, letting them have a voice, because for a majority of the time, that voice is stripped from them. So just them learning the skills on how to do that, how to advocate for themselves, and how to look into things. If I'm giving them a phone number within the community to, reach out, to investigate, to find out, that they know what that information is like, that they know what kind of questions to ask, what information they want to make sure that they walk away from, so again, part of the education piece. So, it's about uplifting, and it's about helping them, overcome what they've been through, and making them feel that they matter, because again, that's been stripped from them. And a lot of times, whether if they're, coming from their country here, because even the journey, however they take that journey to come, from their country here to the United States, and then if they're victimized here or been victimized in their country, there's been so much that's been taken from them. And, and sometimes when we meet people, they're broken down, they're battered, and they're at their lowest point. So it's a matter of kind of just providing a safety net, and letting them know that they matter, that they are important, and giving them a voice. So I think that all community agencies can do that.
Absolutely. I love that. Of course, giving back the power in the agency is super key to healing, and so important to survivors. I wanted to ask either you, Leo, or you, Priscilla, if you had any of those resources that exist that do their best to help survivors navigate through these different barriers and kind of break down those barriers that you wanted to uplift. You mentioned 211, but I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to bring up.
Probably Priscilla have more information about the central area. I work in Dallas, Texas for about a year, and it's amazing how many resources people have there. Undocumented immigrants have there in Dallas. The nonprofit community around immigrants is very, very well organized, super strong. We don't have that here in Florida. There are excellent, great organizations in Florida, of course, like good organizations. But I haven't experienced what I experienced in Dallas when I was there for like almost a year. What I will say is that the wrong help can harm, and I will say, to people, many times they are desperate to have some sort of avenue to resolve their issues or to get some help, or and they knock the wrong door, and then they are harmed. And then there are many people out there trying to take advantage of that. People who say, well, I am a notary and I can help you to prepare the documents, or people who are practicing some sort of as a doctor or nurses when they don't have the license and they are charging money, or people who sells different type of medicines when those are not even approved, and they are just there to charge. So I would say, people have to be careful as to where they go to obtain help, because many times they end paying like a huge amount of money for nothing, and then they don't actually get help from the appropriate person. But here in Florida, I would say, 211, but sometimes it depends what is the local resources, because, for example, Miami have places where people can go. Orlando, usually Tampa, not a lot. There are a few places, but not a lot here in Tampa. And other than that, it's really challenging. Jacksonville, just a few places. Tallahassee, probably no. the service centers, if a person is victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, there are resources for them. And they don't ask for identity, they don't ask for documents, they don't ask for social security, for nothing, and they can obtain help. They can provide even housing. Some programs, they can provide housing for up to 2 years. And usually there are programs for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault who can provide counseling also. There are a lot of nonprofits. Catholic Charities also helps a lot through their immigration program. So I think those Lutheran Social Services, they also have programs that brings services like professional services, or they provide food for people. So many churches, they are extremely helpful in that regard. I think those are good resources to go.
Yeah, no. I think that a lot of those things that Leo has mentioned definitely is very helpful. I do appreciate one thing that you did say, Leo, because you are absolutely right. There's a lot of agencies that want to do well and do support in a very positive way. And then there's also some agencies and some programs that can, their help can feel a little bit like re-victimizing, the client. Maybe with the way they're being treated, or maybe the way of just like lack of, contact. For example, I had a survivor call me, and she was just so upset how she's been trying to get in contact with an agency, left a number of messages, and nobody's responded back. So it can be very frustrating, especially for somebody that's already been traumatized, that's already, going through this process, and depending on where they're at with their trauma, it's just like another layer of just disappointment, added to that. So we don't want to do that, right? We want to be able to uplift them. Like Leo said, there are a lot of different agencies within the community. I think that we may not be aware of what everybody has to offer. I know what I can speak of, here at the Victim Service Center, we do have a nice resource guide available to our survivors when they meet with us, that we provide with them, with just all different types of resources within the community. I can also say that some agencies, I can't speak to all, but some agencies will have, their services their literature, their resources, all their stuff, bilingual, right? So they may have materials in Spanish, they may have bilingual staff that can address them, but some services may not, right? So that's a challenge. But I will highlight two resources that I thought that might be helpful. One that Leo mentioned, Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities does have, immigration services, and within that department, it offers some immigration services, some legal services, as well as employment services. And in addition to that, they will provide referrals to social services. So it's like a nice network, one-stop shop, kind of place where they can provide you, depending on what your need is, they can provide you that assistance. They're located in Orlando on 1771 North Cimarron Boulevard. And that phone number is 407-658-0110. And the other agency that I wanted to, put out there as well, is called Shepherd's Hope. It's a free clinic for all who are uninsured. And they're located in Winter Garden, Florida. They're located on 455 9th Street. And their phone number is 407-876-6699. And that's just a clinic that will provide services to those that are uninsured. And it's a free clinic. So again, those are just two resources here in our, Central Florida, area that can be helpful. And sometimes we'll have people call our helpline, our VSC helpline, even just asking for resources. So if anybody that maybe was sexually assaulted, or maybe, a victim of a crime, they can always call the helpline. Maybe for services, which our number is 407-500-HEAL. And that's HEAL, or they can call our office, right? Our office is 407-254-9415. So those are just community resources, and always in doubt, like if you're not sure, ask. That's what I want to just put out there. I want anybody and everybody to know, if you are not sure of something, do not be afraid to ask. You know, you don't lose anything by asking. A lot of times people are so afraid to ask. And it's just like, it's amazing what doors you might open up, what answers you might get to those, difficult questions just by asking a simple question. We get multiple phone calls in the office, multiple phone calls on the helpline where people are just asking simple questions. We're able to answer them at the moment, whether it might be exactly what you were looking for, or if it's not, I'm going to let you know that as well, right? One time I was managing the helpline, and I had somebody who called and was just like, I need, does your agency provide shelter? And I said to her, unfortunately, we do not provide shelters. We're not a shelter agency. However, let me guide you to some other agencies that may provide shelters or other resources that you can contact for that type of assistance, right? So I just want to encourage anybody and everybody, when in doubt, just ask. Do not be afraid to call, because at this point, it's just a matter of just trying to get information. And when you don't have anything, it's hard to, lose and you have nothing. But because I deal with that all the time, and I just want to let people know, just ask when you just don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate both of you kind of uplifting these great resources. I think the important thing is knowing that there are things out there. And absolutely, and also in Shepherd's Hope, we're great partners with them as well. We actually just opened up a satellite office out there too. So we have an advocate sitting at Shepherd's Hope in West Orange as well. I think that's a great place to sign off. But before I do, I just wanted to ask if there's anything else that you'd like to bring up, anything that you want undocumented immigrants to know, maybe something you'd like to say to them, or anything else that you'd like to share with the general public that we may not have addressed.
I'll just start by saying that I know that it can be challenging trying to navigate, any kind of system. When you arrive here, when you're unsure, when you're a victim of a crime, or, you're dealing with some major circumstances, a lot of times people feel afraid. They lack education, they lack resources, they don't know who to call or who to speak to. And I just want to encourage and empower, these people, these survivors, to call, to reach out. A lot of times they might feel like they're alone, but they're not. There are people that are willing to provide assistance, are willing to support in any which way they can, to see them succeed and to see them heal, to see them just obtain what they're looking for. So I definitely want to let people know when they are not sure to ask. And I also want to say that specifically with the Victim Service Center, we definitely have multiple staff members that are bilingual. We are offering more services in Spanish, and we're starting up a Spanish support group. It's something that I'm working really hard on. It's something that I know that they've been working on in the past. As I keep talking to more, Hispanic survivors, it's something that they're asking for. So we're going to be working on that, providing a schedule. So if anybody wants any more information on that, or they know somebody that might benefit from that service, please call our office. They can ask to speak to me directly, and I will definitely reach out. But just to, let you know that there's support out there. You do have rights, you do have rights as an individual to advocate for yourself, especially, and to obtain or just to investigate, what's out there, what you're eligible for. So we're definitely here. I know that I can speak for myself, that I'm definitely here to provide that assistance.
I would say that people, if people want to help, there are plenty of opportunities to help, like plenty of opportunity, through volunteering for social services organization, nonprofit, different churches, different social groups within the cities. I think that is important. And also, if people doesn't have the time to volunteer, or they don't have the money to donate to a specific cause, I would say they can always do something for good. And if they hear something which is a misconception or a harmful statement, I would say to clarify those. I think that is important. Many times we have seen people talking about immigrants or immigration in a wrong way, and in the wrong way because they have the wrong facts. And sometimes you will deal with people that they won't understand either way, right? But that might happen. But if that is another way that someone can actually help and sometimes provide more results in that way than even spending 8 hours on Sundays volunteering. If you hear something, or if you know that someone needs some service and you have the information, provide that information. I think that is important, and clarifying those facts to those who haven't grown. I think that is also extremely helpful. And getting informed about what is going on in your community, in the specific community, is also important, because it might happen that you are interested in participating in something, and then at the same time you will meet more people who can provide services and help to others. So I think that is helpful.
I love that. I love that. That thing that seems like a small thing that we could all do, but it really has a great impact on just hosting these conversations, correcting individuals, and making sure we have the right information out there and learning more. So with that, I think that's a great place to sign off. So thank you for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free, confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear, and you're not alone. And thank you so much, Priscilla and Leo, for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.